Hello and welcome along to this little tutorial where I will be discussing how to build connectors the easiest possible way. There are multiple ways of building connectors. We're going to focus today on utilizing essentially existing connectors to build new ones because connectors are separated in lots of ways into very niche specific tools they connect to, but also just protocol connectors like REST API or even GraphQL. And a lot of the time you want to use a REST API in your connector. And so why not just build it with a connector and then somehow use what you've built to be able to let other people use it. So that's the use case we're going to talk about today. And I've started with these three little files here. These are available in the link below. And they're really simple. It's a BPMN model, as you can see. It has a start event with a front end, which asks us some text that needs to be translated and the language. We then will do something, presumably, I would hope, and then we'll see the translation in another form. That's basically what the three files are. So what we want to do is we want to replace this. So I'm going to remove this. I'm going to add a task. And what I want to replace this with is with a connector, obviously, a connector that can do the translating for me. Now, I don't have an explicit connector to do translation. You can see here that there's a bunch of different ways I could do it. Maybe I could connect to an external service with a REST API that would do it for me. Maybe I could ping someone on Slack and make them do it for me, but that seems a little bit slow. There's a whole bunch of them. What I'll do is I will use the OpenAI connector. And I'm going to use this in order to translate the text because I think that'll work really well. So you can see when I select this, there's a lot going on here because this is a very general connector. It can be used for basically any kind of communication. And it's got a lot of different fields and a lot of different things that we need to add. To make this work as a translator, I first need to understand that I need an API key for here. Luckily, I already have one and it's stored in the secrets of this particular organization that I have. So I'm going to put in secrets OpenAI. You can create those yourself. There's some details on secrets and the docs. Next up, I have organization. Not sure what that does. Next, we have chat or moderation. Chat seems fine to me. We have the model we want to use. In many ways, we're given too many options for the very narrow use case we want to do. We really only want to go in here into the prompt and we want to specifically say that we want to translate, and this is a variable text to translate to language. Okay, that's what we want. We don't need this choices thing. We don't need error handling really. We don't need to worry about it, but we do need to deal with the output because we want to try and put the output into a variable we want to use. And in this case, I'm going to basically take translated text. It's going to be the variable I'll be using. And what I'm doing is I'm saying from the response, get the body. The body has this JSON format. And what I'm doing here in feel is I'm just finding the choices variable. I'm getting the first element in it. I know it's 1, not 0, just bear with me. We're getting the first element there. We're getting whatever the variable messages is, and in message there's content, and we put the content, which is the response, into this translated text. And this should translate using OpenAI. Okay, so let's give this a try. Deploying things are actually quite easy. There is a very cunning button on the screen right now. It says deploy. That's a good place to start. So when I click deploy, I'm going to pick a server to deploy it to, which is this one right here. And now we can start it. The deployment's worked. So once we have it deployed, we basically take that file, we put it onto a server where now we can start an instance of it. I'm going to click run. And when I do, I can see the front end that I created, which is very basic with the text to be translated and a language to be translated into. The text I want to translate is, can I please pet your dog? And I want to do this in German because I live in Germany. There are lots of very nice dogs and I want to pet them and I don't know how to say that in German. So I'm going to click run. And what's going to happen now is it's going to start an instance with the variables that I mentioned. We're going to go into operate just now to take a look at how that looks within the process. What should happen is we should go into operate. We should see the process go into OpenAI. There we are. Great. We have the variables we sent. You can see here, language is German. Text to translate is, can I please pet your dog? And the translated text looks good. And now we can see the other front end is going to have hopefully that text right in here. Let's assign it to me. There we go. Fantastic. Now I can go and pet dogs whenever I want, which is fantastic. Now, as good as this is, let's rewind a bit and go back to my model. So I was able to do this because, well, luckily there are really good documentation on how to use OpenAI. I was able to go and create a key somewhere to use, which is great. And I also know the feel notation. So this part here, which is probably the most complicated part of how to parse the JSON, I was able to figure that out and also understand how variables work and all sorts of things that if you have any sort of minor technical background, you should kind of have concepts of. Now, if you imagine that I gave this to somebody who, let's say, knows how to build models really well, but really doesn't do too much in terms of technical implementation, there's a whole bunch of potential pitfalls they could have. There's a bunch of fields here that I know are not relevant, but no one necessarily does. And there's also a bunch of things that they would need to know, like formatting. What does the grammar look like for the expression language, that sort of thing. What I want to do now is show you how you can help those people by implementing something here and then creating a new template and a new connector based on what you've built in order to let people who maybe have a more narrow use case than simply giving them all the options for OpenAI. Let's say, for instance, let's think about how we would do this if we wanted to give somebody else the ability to translate text whenever they wanted. So that's what we're going to do right now. Now, we already do have everything we need added to the properties panel. We've tested it and it works. So what we can do is, and this is the first quite nice thing, is up here we have a save as button. And if we hit that, click save as, we can then copy the original template plus the additions we've made to create a new template with that information, which is super handy if you want to use a pre-populated template. We're going to do something a little more complicated. So I'm just going to add OpenAI translator and then interactive TTP for translations. Okay, once I click save, it'll create the template and we'll be brought to the template editor. So here what we'll see is the properties panel on the right and then the JSON which represents that properties panel. So you can see here, this is the properties panel that we in JSON format. One of the interesting things you might notice is that there's a whole bunch of stuff here that, for instance, is already hidden from you because as a user, there's some things you don't need to know. For instance, this is a technical attribute that never needs to be changed, and it is labeled hidden. So if I would just put in here text, it would then appear, and it's right there at the bottom. So this is always a representation of what this XML says. So in this case, we don't want someone seeing this or messing with it, so I'm going to leave it at hidden. There we go. So now let's talk about how we're going to turn this into a more user-friendly translation connector. The first thing is we're going to get rid of some things that we don't need the user to deal with. Let's start with scrolling down here and seeing organization. So organization, you can see it's highlighted here, is not useful. I don't know why it would be. I never really read all the docs, so I'm just going to delete it. Okay, so that is gone. So that will not be populated and no one will need to populate it. The authentication we shall keep. I'm going to go through now and I'm going to just remove all the things that I don't think are necessary, that we don't need to do. And but I'm going to do that by doing one of two things. If we don't need the value at all and we don't need it for the user to see, we can just delete it. So that's the first thing. So let's go through and do that. Great, so I've done that. I've gone through and just removed any blocks of stuff that has no value and I don't want to give it a value. We are left with stuff that we would like to have a value on. One of the key things here is we want the operation, chat operation, to be sent. I want the model to be sent, but I don't want anyone to change it. I could make it uneditable, but I don't even think that it's useful to see. So instead, I'm going to go down to my operation. There it is. And you can see that operation, there it is. And its type is drop down. If I put in type hidden, it disappears from the properties panel on the right, and it'll still send the value chat when this is executed. So we still get the value sent to the API, but we don't need to see it and users can't change it. This is super handy. Next thing, let's do the same thing with model, because also the model 3.1 is fine. I don't think I need anyone to use version 4. There we go. Oh, there's a fun way to spell hidden. Okay, good. So that's gotten rid of almost everything, and we've left with things we need and that might actually change. Let's make it more user-friendly now. Specifically, let's give the user more of an idea of what exactly they need to do and remove any ambiguity. So we've done step 1 and 2 basically, which is removing the things that don't need to be set, that we don't really care about, and hiding them away from the user. And the second one is actually hiding the things that we do want to have set, but the user shouldn't tinker with. So like the model type being 3.5. So now we're going to do the third part, which is add the inputs, or add to the properties panel the values we need in order to make this run. There are two values we need to add. The first is the text that is required to translate, and the second part is the language they want to translate into. Now, we can see this, that in the prompt, it has those variables written here, but this is not very useful. So instead, we're going to make this a little more user-friendly by adding these explicitly. So in properties here, we can start by opening up a new entry, and the nice thing is that this will tell you quite quickly how to build what we want to build. You can see that already it's saying it's missing some stuff. So let's start by adding a label, and this is going to be text to translate. Okay, so that's the first part. This is going to tell the user that what we need to do. The next part is we're going to add, this is kind of unique, we're going to add this. This says feel optional. What does that mean? So feel is the expression language that Camunda uses, the friendly enough expression language. And by adding feel being optional to this, it means that users are able to either decide to use an expression to put in there. So it could be dynamic or it could be a static variable. They're the two options. So we're going to leave that as optional. After feel, we need a value. So let's type that. You can see the autocomplete is kind of handy. The value is going to be exactly what we expect it to be. You can see here text to translate is the variable that we call it. So we are going to give it the value of text to translate. Okay. The next part is quite obviously the binding, because if I hover over here, it's still red. It's saying it's missing type and binding. So let's add type first. The type is going to be, well, because it's a text space, I'm going to add a text, and I'm also going to add, actually add a group, because I want it in a specific area. I would like it beside where the payload is, and this area right here. And you can see that here it says input is payload, so I can just type in input here, and it'll show up in that area. Now we need comma. We also need the binding to add now. So let's do that. And I'll explain what the binding is. So far what we've done is we've added some nice ways in which we can take a variable from the context. Like for instance, we can say whatever the value of text to translate is, will take that value, but we also need to bind it to a variable that the the worker can work on. And we can do that here by linking it to a variable. So we're saying the value of this should be given to the worker, this value. So I can type in here the type, and I can say the type is going to be, and you see the list here, it's going to be an input. So the input is the binding, and the name of the input is actually going to be exactly the same as this, which is the text to translate. Okay, so let's see what that's going red. And we are missing another comma. I'm bad at commas. And the binding is done, and we should be able to see that there it is, text to translate. Maybe text box isn't exactly right. Maybe we could have a string. No, I think text box feels right. Okay, so there it is. Text to translate is added, and the variable is already added there. That's pretty good. One more thing, I want to make sure that this is not ignored, because actually if they delete that, it'll cause an error. So one more thing we can do is add constraints. And in here, I can add the constraint of not empty, and then that true. So now this will be a required field. They have to put in the value there. Okay, so we're looking pretty good. We have our text to translate, and the next label we need is to add the value, and I will do that right now in exactly the same way. So I have now managed to add the second input property, which is the language, which makes total sense, exactly the same way as the text to translate. We're now looking a little better. There's still one more thing, which is this prompt. I don't really need this visible anymore, so I'm actually going to go down to where the prompt is. Let's do a search, Control F, prompt. Cool, and I actually don't want them changing this or even looking at it. So I'm going to change the type to hidden. So this is, they're going to disappear once I get rid of this. There we go. And so comma, great. So now this is completely gone, but don't forget, because it's hidden, it's still being sent into the variables. You can see here, there's the value we're sending in. So the value stays the same, but it's not editable. So now take a look at that properties panel. It's got the text to translate, which could be a primitive type, or it could be a value, and the language, which could be the same. It's got the secrets thing, and it's got the result. Everything else is either hidden or not necessary and been removed. The last thing we need is to add a cool icon to it. So I'm going to quickly search. This one looks good. I'm going to add a little icon. There we go. So that's added now to the connector. And now the final phase is I can publish this. So right now I've just built a template, but I also have the ability up here to just click publish and either publish to this project or publish to the organization. In this case, I'm going to publish this to the project. So publishing this, let's go with coolest version. I'm going to click publish. Great. So what that does is, if we go back to our demo here, we have the connector template right there. We have our model that we originally created. It's right here. You can see this thing in all its glory. And now we have the ability to grab a new task, and the list of available services now includes this. So now what should be able to happen, if I got everything correct, is I should be able to delete that, place this here, change this to the translate, and you can see that this has a really simple properties panel now that basically anyone can understand. All the complexity of a call, external call, is disappeared. You don't even know that it's even going near OpenAI, except that it's got some wording there to give you a clue. Translate words, and now we can deploy this and run it. And that's done in exactly the same way as we did before. We click deploy, we choose our server, it's now deployed, great, and now we can run it in exactly the same way. So let's translate. Let's say, how many pairs of glasses do you own? Let's go with Hindi this time, and let's run that. let's see the instance. Here it is, and we can open up our translation app, go to our task, and if I were able to read Hindi, which sadly I'm not, I would be able to read this. Luckily I have the English translation, I guess, there. So that's that. We have done it. We've created a very, very simple connector without needing to code anything that will be useful for anybody who might want to translate some words. Enjoy.